The first knife whispered past August Ridley's ear, embedding itself in the adobe wall with a dull thunk. The second blade caught moonlight as it arced toward his throat, wielded by a scarred man whose breath reeked of whiskey and violence. August threw himself sideways, his shoulders slamming into the alley's brick wall, as a third attacker emerged from the shadows behind him, a massive brute with hands like ham hocks and a club that could crush a man's skull. The narrow passage between the Painted Rose Saloon and Chen's Mercantile had become a death trap, the desert wind carrying the metallic scent of blood and the distant howl of coyotes. I should have kept walking, stranger. The knife wielder hissed his blade, weaving hypnotic patterns in the air. Mr. Day Sung don't appreciate folks asking questions about his business. August's hand drifted toward his Colt, but 3 against 1, in a space barely wide enough for his shoulders, meant his gun would be useless. Behind him, the club wielder grunted and swung the weapon, whistling through the air where August's head had been a heartbeat before. "A what business?" August growled, dodging another knife thrust while keeping his back to the wall. "The kind that keeps little yellow sluts where they belong," the third man said, stepping into view. He was thin as a rail, with dead eyes and a smile that belonged on a corpse. Speaking of which, a sound stopped all 4 men cold, a whimper, soft as a dying breath coming from deeper in the alley. August's blood turned to ice as he realized what they'd been guarding. "She's still breathing," Deadeyes said, his grin widening. "For now." The rage that flooded August's veins was white-hot primal, carrying him back to that terrible night in Kansas when he'd found Sarah nailed to the barn door and Emma's small body broken in the dirt. The same helpless fury, the same desperate need to protect what couldn't protect itself. But this time he wouldn't be too late. August feinted left, drawing the knife wielder's lunge, then spun right into the club bearer's blind spot. His elbow caught the big man's throat, crushing his windpipe. The club tumbled from nerveless fingers as the brute collapsed, gasping and choking. The knife wielder recovered fast, slashing at August's face. But August caught his wrist and twisted until bone snapped. The blade clattered across the packed earth. Deadeyes was scrambling for a gun, but August's boot caught him in the temple, dropping him like a stone. The sudden silence was deafening. August stood among the fallen men, his chest heaving, his knuckles bloody. Then that sound came again, the whimper that had started it all. She was 20 feet deeper in the alley, curled against a pile of refuse like a discarded doll. The stench hit him first, human waste, rotting food, and underneath it, all the sickly, sweet smell of infection and despair. Chinese, maybe 16, her head shaved so roughly, the scalp showed pale scars where the razor had cut too deep. Manacles had worn her wrists raw, the metal now gone, but the wounds still weeping. Her feet were swollen black with gangrene, and she was eating from a pig's trough, her thin fingers scraping at the slop with mechanical desperation. But it was her eyes that stopped August's heart. Dark, intelligent, holding the same patient hopelessness he'd seen in the mirror every morning for 3 years. The look of someone who'd learned to wait for death because it was kinder than life. The memory hit him like a physical blow, Emma's small hand in his as she lay dying, her voice barely a whisper. "Papa, it hurts." The way she'd looked at him with absolute trust, believing he could fix anything, make anything better. He'd failed her then. He wouldn't fail now. "Please," the girl whispered in accented English, and August's world cracked apart. He knelt in the filth, his weathered hands reaching for her face. Behind him, one of the attackers groaned and stirred, but August didn't care. Nothing mattered except the broken child looking at him like he might be real, might be hope. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here and I'm not leaving." Grief Hollow squatted in the Arizona desert, like a canker on the landscape, its sun-bleached buildings the color of old bones. The town had earned its name during the silver rush of '79, when a cave-in at the Esperanza mine killed 43 men in a single morning. The survivors had dug graves until their hands bled, then looked around at what remained and named their home accordingly. Now it was 1883, and the silver was gone, but the grief remained. It lived in the empty storefronts, in the hollow eyes of the men who'd lost everything in the silence that fell whenever certain names were spoken. Most of all, it lived in the shadow of Dae Sung's empire. August had been heading for California when his horse threw a shoe, forcing an unwanted stop. 3 days to find a farrier, he'd figured. Long enough for a few drinks and a bath, then back on the trail toward whatever passed for a life these days. That was before the questions started, innocent inquiries about work, about the town, about the strange sounds that came from the buildings behind the saloon. Questions that had apparently reached the wrong ears. Now he sat in the painted rows, the girl Lanfen, she'd whispered, sleeping in the room above, while Dr. Holloway worked to save her feet. The saloon was dim and smoky, filled with the usual collection of drifters, gamblers, and whores. Piano music tinkled from the back room, competing with the buzz of flies and the distant whisper of wind through broken window frames. "You're the one found her." August didn't turn around. He knew law when he heard it, even the corrupted kind. "Don't know what you're talking about." Deputy Calhoun moved around to face him, a thin man with nervous eyes, and a badge that looked borrowed. His gun hand trembled slightly, whether from drink or fear, August couldn't tell. "The Chinese girl. Word travels fast in a town this size." Calhoun's voice carried forced authority. "She belongs to Mr. Dae Sung. Respectable businessman, owns half the—" "I've heard the speech." August finally looked up, and Calhoun took an involuntary step back. There was something in the stranger's eyes that made smart men careful. "She's hurt bad. Needs proper doctoring. She's property, legal and documented." Calhoun's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Owes Mr. Dae Sung $70 for passage room board damages to his warehouse. He's been generous, considering what she done." August's grip tightened on his whiskey glass. "What she done?" "Burned down part of his storehouse, stole from him, violated her contract." The deputy's voice gained confidence as he recited the familiar lies. "She signed papers, agreed to work off her debt. All legal under territorial law. She's 16 years old enough to make her own choices, old enough to face the consequences." Calhoun leaned closer, the whiskey on his breath. "You hand her over quiet like nobody gets hurt. You keep interfering." He shrugged. "Well, accidents happen in the desert." August stood slowly, his full height, making the smaller man crane his neck. "I was a U.S. Marshal for 15 years. You know what we called men who bought and sold children." "What?" "Dead men." The words dropped like stones in still water. "We made sure of it." Calhoun's face went pale. "You ain't no marshal now. I checked the territorial records. You resigned 3 years ago after your family got themselves—" August's hand moved faster than thought, catching Calhoun by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The deputy's eyes bulged as his feet kicked uselessly in the air. "Careful how you finish that sentence," August said quietly. "I've got nothing left to lose, which makes me dangerous. Tell your boss if he wants the girl, he can come through me." He set Calhoun down carefully, like handling a poisonous snake. The deputy stumbled backward, gasping and clutching his throat. You just signed your own death warrant." Calhoun wheezed. "Hers too. Mr. Dae Sung don't forgive. He don't forget." August returned to his whiskey. Around him, the saloon had gone quiet, conversations dying as word spread. "Then we understand each other." Calhoun backed toward the door, his hand on his gun but lacking the courage to draw. "This ain't over, stranger. Not by a long shot." As the deputy stumbled out, August caught his reflection in the bar mirror. 3 years of whiskey and wandering had carved deep lines around his eyes, but something had changed. For the first time since Sarah and Emma died, he felt a purpose beyond mere survival. The girl upstairs had given him something he'd thought lost forever, a reason to fight. Dr. Holloway's office occupied the ground floor of a two-story building that had seen better decades. The wooden sign outside was faded, the paint peeling under the relentless desert sun. Inside, the smell of carbolic acid battled with the underlying odor of whiskey and defeat. Holloway himself was a small man with graying hair and hands that shook not from age, August realized, but from the constant weight of impossible choices. Right now, those hands were cleaning the infected wounds on Lanfen's feet, while she bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. "Infection's bad," Holloway said without looking up. "Should have been treated days ago. Much longer and she'll lose the feet, maybe the legs." August watched the doctor work, noting the genuine care in his movements, despite the tremor in his fingers. "Can you save them?" "Maybe. With proper medicine, proper rest, proper..." He gestured around the cramped office. "This is frontier medicine at its finest. I do what I can with what I have." Lanfen's eyes found August across the room, dark pools of pain and determination. "My name," she whispered in careful English. "Real name Chen Mei Lin. But here I choose Lanfen." "What does it mean?" "Orchid that grows in dark places." A tear slipped down her cheek. "My grandmother say orchids' strongest flowers. They survive when everything else dies." "Why did you burn his warehouse?" The question seemed to surprise her. She glanced at Dr. Holloway, who was pretending not to listen, then back at August. "Because of Chao Shi." "Who's Chao Shi?" "Little girl, 10 years old, from my village." Lanfen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She cry at night. Miss her mama, miss home. So he..." She made a gesture that needed no translation. August felt ice in his veins. Jesus. I watched through window. Too scared to help. Too weak. Her fingers clenched into fists. "But I remember. I remember everything. Before I burn his papers, I take one page. Names, money, who buy girls. Insurance, you understand." Dr. Holloway finished bandaging her feet and stood wiping his hands on a bloody towel. "She needs rest, proper food, medicine I don't have. And she needs to be somewhere safe. Safe." August looked toward the window, where shadows were already gathering as word spread. "Is anywhere safe in this town? There's a boarding house 3 blocks north. Mercy Clay runs it." Holloway's voice dropped. "She might help. Her husband died fighting this kind of business. She's got reasons to hate what Dae Sung represents." "Might. She's also got reasons to be careful. Dae Sung owns the bank that holds her mortgage. He owns the supply lines that keep her business running. He owns..." The doctor's voice trailed off. "He owns everything," August finished. "Not everything. Not yet." Holloway moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the street beyond. "But he's working on it." August helped Lanfen to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed. The simple act of standing sent waves of pain across her face, but she didn't cry out. "Thank you," she told the doctor, "for helping when you not have to." Holloway's hands resumed their trembling. "I had a daughter once, Mary. She'd be about your age now if the fever hadn't taken her." He looked at Lanfen with genuine anguish. "I couldn't save her. Maybe I can save you." As they prepared to leave, August caught the doctor's arm. "What aren't you telling me?" Holloway was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "There's going to be a reckoning. Soon. Too many people have been hurt, too many families destroyed. When it comes..." He met August's gaze. "Make sure you're on the right side." The boarding house was a 2-story structure that had once been white but was now the color of desert sand. Its porch sagged under the weight of too many hard winters, but the windows were clean and the garden was tended small signs of hope. in a town that had forgotten what hope looked like. Mercy Clay answered their knock before August could raise his hand a second time. She was a woman of perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at August, carrying Lanfen, and stepped aside without a word. Upstairs, second door on the right. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. August laid Lanfen down gently, pulling the quilt up to her chin. She was unconscious again, her body finally giving in to exhaustion and pain. "She'll sleep for hours," Mercy said from the doorway. "Come down. We need to talk." They sat in the parlor with coffee. Neither of them wanted the afternoon sun slanting through lace curtains. August could hear the distant sound of the desert wind, lonely as a grave. "You know what you've done," Mercy said finally. "I know what I had to do. Noble, also suicidal." She studied him over her coffee cup. "You're not from here." "Kansas. Was a U.S. Marshal until 3 years ago." "What happened 3 years ago?" August stared into his cup, seeing faces in the dark liquid. "I was tracking a gang of raiders, got too close to their operation. They decided to send a message." His voice went flat, emotionless. "Found my wife Sarah nailed to the barn door. My daughter Emma." He couldn't finish. Mercy's face softened. "I'm sorry. I failed them. Failed my duty. Failed everyone who depended on me." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I won't fail again. That girl upstairs, she's not the first." "What do you mean?" 3 weeks ago, a wagon train came through town. Railroad recruiters, they claimed, looking for workers to lay track in California. Mercy's voice turned bitter. But the girls in that wagon weren't going to any railroad. August felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many? 6. All Chinese, all young. Dae Sung met them at the edge of town, paid cash for the whole lot. Said they were domestic workers, kitchen help for his businesses. She stood pacing to the window. Kitchen help don't get their heads shaved. Kitchen help don't get chained. Where are the others? Sold. Shipped to houses in Tucson, Phoenix, Santa Fe. Lanfen was the only one left. Mercy turned back to him. "You want to know why?" August nodded. "Because she had spirit. Because she fought back. Dae Sung likes to break the spirited ones, personally considers it a professional challenge." Mercy's hands clenched into fists. But before he could finish the job, she did something. Burned part of his private storehouse, the part where he kept his records. What kind of records? Names. Buyers. Politicians who looked the other way for the right price. Bank transactions, shipping manifests, correspondence with other businessmen. Mercy's voice dropped. The kind of information that could bring down his entire network, or get everyone who knows about it killed. Does he know she saw them? He knows she was there when the fire started. Whether she actually read anything. Mercy shrugged. That's why he wants her back so badly. It's not about the money she owes. It's about what she might know. They sat in silence, the weight of the situation settling between them. Finally, August spoke. "You said there might be others willing to help. Might. If they think we can win." Mercy leaned forward. "Elijah Washington runs the blacksmith shop, good man, but he's got a wife and twin boys to think about. Pastor Morrow at the church has a conscience, but his congregation depends on Dae Sung's donations. And there's Josie Chen at the telegraph office. Another Chinese. Came here 10 years ago as a mail-order bride. Her husband died in a mining accident, left her with the telegraph business and a mountain of debt. She's managed to survive by being invisible, but she knows what it's like to be alone and vulnerable. Will they help? Maybe. If they think standing up won't just get them killed for nothing." Mercy's voice dropped. But August, you need to understand what you're up against. Dae Sung doesn't just own businesses here. He owns souls. The sheriff, the territorial judge, half the town council. He's built himself a kingdom, and he protects it with blood. I've brought down kingdoms before. Have you? Because this isn't about justice or law. This is about survival. Raw, ugly survival where right and wrong don't matter, only power. She leaned closer. You help that girl and you make an enemy of everyone who profits from the system. In a town like this, that's almost everyone. August thought of Lanfen upstairs, of her whispered please, of the way she'd looked at him with eyes that held no hope. Then almost everyone can burn. But before Mercy could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the street outside, many hoofbeats moving with purpose and menace. They're here, Mercy said, her face going pale. August moved to the window. 3 dozen riders were dismounting in the street, some carrying torches despite the daylight, others holding rifles that gleamed in the afternoon sun. At their head rode Deputy Calhoun, but beside him sat a man August had never seen before. Dae Sung was perhaps 40, immaculately dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than most people in Grief Hollow made in a year. His face was unremarkable, except for his eyes, flat, emotionless, like looking into a snake's gaze. He dismounted with practiced grace, his movements suggesting a man accustomed to violence, despite his civilized appearance. Mrs. Clay. Dae Sung called, his voice carrying easily in the desert air. I believe you have something that belongs to me. August was climbing the stairs when he heard Lanfen's voice, weak but alert. She was sitting up in bed, her back straight, despite the pain, her dark eyes fixed on the window. How many? She asked in English. Too many. August knelt beside the bed, checking his gun. They want you back. Of course they do. Her voice was flat, resigned. I know too much. I see too much. The page you saved, where is it? She reached under her pillow, producing a folded piece of paper. Names, money, dates. Everything he tried to hide. August took the paper, scanning its contents. Judge Morrison, $500. Sheriff Hawkins, $200 per shipment. Mayor Prescott, $1,000 for territorial permits. A dozen other names, all local officials, all with prices beside them. This could bring down his whole operation, he said, if we live long enough to use it. Lanfen struggled to stand, her bandaged feet barely supporting her weight. I go to him. Maybe you live. No, you don't understand. He own everyone, everything. What you have, just gun and angry heart. August helped her back to the bed, his hands gentle but firm. Sometimes that's enough. Your family, they depend on you. They're gone. Killed 3 years ago because I got too close to men like him. August's voice was quiet, controlled. I ran afterward, hid in bottles and brothels trying to forget. But I can't forget, and I can't run anymore. A thunderous knock echoed through the house, followed by Calhoun's voice. Open the door, Mrs. Clay. We have warrants. Stay here, August told Lanfen. Lock the door behind me. Wait. She caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. If I die, someone should know Chen Mei Lin. Someone should remember. You're not going to die. But if I do, if we both do, promise me something. What? Promise you remember little girl too. Chao Shi. She have no one else to remember her. August nodded, understanding flowing between them. I promise. Downstairs, Mercy stood by the front door with a shotgun in her hands. Her face was pale but determined, and August could see the woman her husband had fallen in love with, someone who'd fight for what was right, even if it killed her. What do you want? She called through the door. The Chinese girl. We know she's in there. Calhoun's voice carried official authority, but August could hear the nervousness underneath. We have legal warrants for her arrest. Warrants for what? Arson, theft, destruction of property, violation of a lawful contract. Papers rustled outside. Territorial court has jurisdiction. Open the door or we'll break it down. Mercy looked at August, who nodded. She slid back the bolt and opened the door just wide enough to see outside. Dai Sung stood on the porch, flanked by Calhoun and a dozen armed men. His smile was polite, reasonable, and utterly without warmth. Behind him, August could see more men taking positions around the house, on rooftops, in alleyways behind water troughs. They were completely surrounded. Mrs. Clay, how pleasant to see you again. Dae Sung's voice carried a slight accent, educated, refined, deadly. I believe you have a young woman here who belongs to me. Nobody belongs to anybody. That was settled by the war. Oh, but this isn't slavery. This is contract labor, perfectly legal under territorial law. Dae Sung produced a document from his coat. The young woman in question accepted money for passage to America and agreed to work off her debt. A simple business arrangement signed and witnessed. She's a child. She's of legal age and sound mind. I have the documentation to prove it. His smile widened, revealing teeth like polished ivory. Notarized and sealed. August stepped into view, and the smile vanished from Dae Sung's face like smoke and wind. You must be the former marshal. August Ridley, isn't it? Dae Sung's voice remained calm, but his eyes had gone cold. I've made extensive inquiries. Quite a tragic story, losing your family like that. Such a shame when good people suffer for the sins of others. The words hit like acid, but August's expression never changed. Is that a threat? Merely an observation. Bad things happen to those who interfere in matters beyond their understanding. Dae Sung stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conversational tone. I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Ridley. I'll pay you $100 to walk away. No questions asked, no hard feelings. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that justice in Grief Hollow flows in whatever direction I choose to point it. The mask of civility slipped, revealing something reptilian underneath. I own the sheriff, the judge, the mayor. I own the bank that holds mortgages on half these buildings. I own the freight company that brings supplies, the stage line that carries passengers, the telegraph office that connects us to the outside world. You own everything except the right thing. Dae Sung laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Rights are a luxury for those strong enough to claim them. In the real world, there's only power, and those too weak to seize it. We'll see about that. Indeed we will. Dae Sung gestured to his men. I should mention that several of my associates are positioned on the rooftops around this building. Excellent marksmen, all of them. They have clear lines of sight to every window, every door. August felt the trap closing around them. Too many guns, too many angles. Even if he could reach his rifle, there was no way to fight their way out. Deputy Calhoun. Dae Sung continued. Execute the warrants. Calhoun stepped forward, his gun drawn, but his hands shaking. August Ridley, you're under arrest for interfering with illegal... No. The voice came from behind August. He turned to see Pastor Morrow climbing the porch steps, his white collar bright in the afternoon sun. The pastor was a small man, but his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Pastor Dae Sung's voice held a warning note. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't it? I seem to recall something in Scripture about caring for the least among us, about protecting the innocent from those who would exploit them. And that girl is hardly innocent. She's a whore and a criminal. She's a child of God. Morrow's voice cut through the protests. And I'll not stand by while she's dragged back to whatever hell you've created. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of armed men. August could see doubt creeping into some faces, uncertainty replacing blind obedience. You're making a mistake, Pastor. Dae Sung said, his composure cracking slightly. Your church depends on my generosity. Your congregation works in my businesses. Think carefully before you throw that away. I am thinking carefully. For the first time in years. Morrow stepped closer, his empty hands steady at his sides. I'm thinking about all the sermons I've given about doing right, while I stood by and watched you destroy lives. More voices joined the growing crowd, townspeople drawn by the commotion, curious and afraid in equal measure. August saw Elijah Washington pushing through the crowd, the massive blacksmith's face grim with purpose. "I've been doing some thinking myself," Elijah said, his deep voice carrying across the street, "about what kind of man I am, what kind of example I set for my boys. This is ridiculous," Dae-sung snapped. "You're all risking everything for a Chinese whore. Watch your mouth." The voice belonged to Josie Chen, the telegraph operator. She stood at the edge of the crowd, small and precise, but her eyes blazed with fury. "That girl upstairs, she could be my sister, my daughter. She's one of us." The crowd was changing now, dividing into factions. Some of Dae-sung's supporters were backing away, unwilling to face down their neighbors. Others pressed closer, drawn by the smell of violence and the promise of blood. "Enough!" Dae-sung's composure finally shattered. "This ends now. Calhoun arrest them all, inciting a riot, interfering with justice, harboring a fugitive, on whose authority everyone turned." Lanfen stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her shaved head pale in the sunlight. She was barely standing, leaning heavily against the doorframe, but her voice was clear and strong. "I said, on whose authority do you arrest innocent people?" Dae-sung's face went white. "You can't even read, you ignorant." "I read 4 languages: Mandarin, Cantonese, English, Spanish." She stepped onto the porch, moving slowly, but with dignity. "I read your contracts, your ledgers, your correspondence. I know exactly what you are." She's lying. Dae-sung reached for the document in his coat, but his hands were shaking with rage. "She's a criminal, a whore, she'll say anything." "Then show me the contract I signed." Lanfen's voice grew stronger with each word. "Show me the debt I owe." Dae-sung thrust the paper at her, but she barely glanced at it before looking up with something that might have been a smile. "This is not my signature. This is not my name. This is not my agreement." She held the paper up so the crowd could see. "This is forgery. This is lie." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Even some of Dae-sung's own men were staring at him with disgust and suspicion. "She's lying." Dae-sung snatched the paper back, his voice rising to a shriek. "She's a whore, a criminal. She burned my property." "I burned your lies." Lanfen reached into her blanket and pulled out the folded page. "But I saved truth. Names, money crimes, all written in your own hand." Dae-sung lunged for the paper, but Elijah's massive hand caught him by the throat. "Easy there," the blacksmith rumbled. "Let the lady finish." Lanfen unfolded the paper with steady hands. "Judge Morrison, $500 for looking other way. Sheriff Hawkins, $200 for each wagon he don't see. Mayor Prescott, stop." Dae-sung's voice was barely human now. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly." Lanfen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But that is not the worst thing you do. Worst thing is what you do to Chao Shi." The name hung in the air like a curse. August saw the exact moment when fear replaced rage in Dae-sung's eyes. "Who's Chao Shi?" Pastor Morrow asked gently. Lanfen's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. "Little girl, 10 years old, from my village in China. She cry at night, miss her mama. So Mr. Dae-sung decide to teach her lesson about crying." "What kind of lesson?" This from Mercy, her voice tight with maternal rage. "He beat her. Beat her until she stopped crying. Beat her until she stopped breathing." Lanfen's voice broke. "I watch through window. I do nothing. Too scared, too weak. But I remember. I remember everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. You murdered a child. Pastor Morrow said, his voice barely a whisper. I disciplined a disobedient employee who was disrupting my business. The words were cut off by Elijah's fist, which caught Dae Sung in the jaw and sent him sprawling in the dirt. The crowd surged forward, but August stepped between them and the fallen man. No, he said firmly. This ends with justice, not vengeance. Justice. Calhoun still had his gun drawn, but his hands were shaking badly. You want justice? I'll give you justice. He fired not at August, but at Lanfen, standing defenseless on the porch. August moved without thinking, his body covering hers as the bullet whined past. But the shot had been a signal. Dae Sung's men opened fire from their positions, muzzle flashes lighting up the afternoon like deadly fireworks. The crowd scattered, screaming. August rolled behind the porch railing, pulling Lanfen with him as bullets chipped wood and shattered windows. His gun was in his hand, now returning fire at the shapes moving on the rooftops. How many shells? Elijah called from the doorway, where he'd taken cover with an old Spencer rifle. Enough, August replied, though he was already down to his last 10 rounds. Pastor Morrow cried out as a bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Dr. Holloway appeared from nowhere, dragging the wounded man to safety, while bullets whistled overhead. The telegraph. August shouted to Josie Chen, who was crouched behind a water trough. Can you get word to the territorial capital? Lines are cut, she called back. Have been since yesterday. Of course they were. Dae Sung hadn't built his empire by leaving loose ends. The fight was going badly. August could see it in the way Dae Sung's men moved, coordinated, professional, with clear fields of fire and superior numbers. This wasn't just a mob with guns. These were killers who knew their business. A bullet splintered the railing inches from his head. August rolled left, coming up behind a support post, and put 2 shots into a sniper on the general store roof. The man pitched forward, tumbling to the street below. But for everyone he dropped, 2 more seemed to take their place. They were being methodically cut to pieces. That's when he heard it, a sound that changed everything, the distant wail of a train whistle growing closer by the second. That's the morning express. Mercy called out, hope brightening her voice. It's not scheduled to stop here. August felt his blood freeze. An unscheduled train meant only one thing, federal marshals. But who had sent word? He looked at Josie Chen, who was grinning, despite the bullets flying around her. Message got through yesterday morning before they cut the lines. Not to the territorial capital, to the federal courthouse in Santa Fe. How? Morse code travels fast when you know how to use it. She ducked as a bullet sparked off the trough beside her. Told them about trafficking, about murder, about corruption. They were already sending men. The train whistle was much closer now, and August could see dust rising from the direction of the station. More importantly, he could see the change in Dae Sung's men, and the way they looked at each other, the way some of them began to edge away from their positions. It's over, August called out. Federal marshals are coming. Anyone still shooting when they get here will hang alongside your boss. That did it. One by one, Dae Sung's hired guns began throwing down their weapons and melting away into the desert. Within minutes, only a handful remained, crouched behind cover, with the desperate look of men who knew they were trapped. Dae Sung himself had taken refuge behind an overturned wagon, a rifle in his hands and madness in his eyes. You think this changes anything? He screamed. You think saving one girl matters? I've got operations in 6 territories, contacts from here to San Francisco. Maybe, August said, standing slowly. But this operation ends here. You don't understand. Dae Sung's voice cracked with hysteria. The system is bigger than me. Cut off one head, 2 more grow back. There will always be buyers, always be sellers, always be men like you who think they're untouchable. August interrupted. until they meet someone who proves them wrong. Dai Sung raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking with rage and fear. The shot went wide, punching harmlessly into the boarding house wall. August's return shot was precise, a bullet through the shoulder that sent Dai Sung's rifle spinning from his grip. The man fell to his knees, clutching the wound, his face twisted with pain and disbelief. "Impossible," he gasped. "I own this town. I own these people." "You own them," August corrected, past tense. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats filled the air as federal marshals rode into town and their badges gleaming in the afternoon sun. Leading them was a hard-faced man August recognized, Captain Morrison, who'd served with him in Kansas before the tragedy. "Well, well," Morrison said, surveying the scene with professional interest. "August Ridley, should have known you'd be in the middle of something like this." "Jim." August holstered his gun. "Took you long enough. Got here as fast as we could after Miss Chen's telegram." Morrison gestured to his men who were already moving to secure the prisoners. "Biggest trafficking operation we've seen in 5 years. That information she sent us names, dates, money transfers. It's going to bring down the whole network." August looked back at Lanfen, who was sitting on the porch steps with tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of release, of a burden finally lifted. "What about the corruption here?" August asked. "Already taken care of. Territorial governors signed arrest warrants this morning. Sheriff Hawkins, Judge Morrison, Mayor Prescott, they're all going to face federal charges." Morrison paused, studying August's face. "There's something else. The governor wants to offer you your commission back. Full marshal's authority based on what happened here." August watched as Dr. Holloway tended to Pastor Morrow's wound, as Elijah helped Josie Chen to her feet, as Mercy emerged from the house with a smile on her face for the first time in years. This was what community looked like, people choosing to stand together when it mattered. "I'll think about it," he said finally. That evening, as the sun set over Grief Hollow, they gathered in the boarding house parlor. The federal marshals had done their work and departed, taking their prisoners and evidence with them. The town was quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet, the peaceful silence of a storm past, rather than the fearful hush of oppression. "So what happens now?" Elijah asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Mercy. "Now we rebuild." Pastor Morrow set his arm in a sling, but his voice strong. "This town has been poisoned for too long. Time to start healing. The federal government wants to establish a safe house here," Josie said. "A place for rescued trafficking victims. They've asked Lanfen to help run it." All eyes turned to the young Chinese woman. She sat quietly for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, then looked up with quiet determination. "I want to do it. Want to help other girls like me, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I need time to heal first. Time to learn. Time to be strong enough to help others be strong." "How much time?" August asked. 1 year. Maybe 2. I need to improve my English, learn about American law, about how to run such a place." She looked around the room at the faces of her friends. "And I need to know I have people who will stand with me when bad men come again." "You'll have that," Dr. Holloway said firmly. "This town owes you a debt we can never repay." "You don't owe me anything," Lanfen replied. "We all choose to do right thing. That is payment enough." August stood moving to the window. Outside Grief Hollow looked the same as it had a week ago, but everything had changed. The town's soul had been cleansed by fire and blood, and what remained was the possibility of something better. "I've made my decision," he said finally, "about the marshal's commission." And Mercy prompted, "I'm taking it, but I want to be assigned here permanently, to oversee the safe house, to make sure nothing like this happens again." Lanfen smiled, the first completely happy expression he'd seen from her. "You would do that. Stay here. This is where I'm needed. This is where I can make a difference." What about your past, your guilt? August thought of Sarah and Emma buried under Kansas soil. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it no longer felt like a chain around his neck. I can't bring them back, but I can honor their memory by protecting others. Dr. Holloway cleared his throat. There's something else. I've been thinking about what happened here, about my part in letting things get so bad. I want to make amends. What do you mean? Mercy asked. I want to donate my medical practice to the safe house. Train others to provide proper care for rescued girls. Make sure no one suffers like Lanfen did because a doctor was too afraid to help. That's generous, August said. It's the least I can do. I failed my own daughter when she needed medicine I couldn't afford. I won't fail anyone else's. 6 months later, August stood in the doorway of the Lanfen Chen's safe house, watching the morning routine unfold. The building that had once housed part of Dee Sung's operation now served a very different purpose. 18 young women from across the territory called it home, at least temporarily. Lanfen moved among them with quiet authority, her hair grown out to shoulder length, wearing a simple blue dress and a bronze badge that identified her as the house's director. She was teaching English to a group of new arrivals, her voice patient and encouraging. Reading is like building bridge, she was saying. Connect one idea to another, one person to another. Build understanding where there was none before. The building had been transformed. Where once there had been bars on the windows, now there were flower boxes. Where once there had been chains and locks, now there were classrooms and a medical clinic. The change was symbolic of something larger, the transformation of Grief Hollow itself. Morning report, Sheriff, Lanfen said, approaching with a clipboard. Maria Santos passed her English examination yesterday. She starts work at the Mercantile next week. Li Wei received a letter from her family in San Francisco. They want her to come home. And we have 3 new arrivals on tomorrow's stage. Any problems? None we can't handle. She paused, studying his face. You look tired. When did you last sleep? I sleep enough. When? August didn't answer, which was answer enough. The past 6 months had been intense, testifying at trials, coordinating with federal authorities, establishing protocols for the safe house. There had been threats, attempts at intimidation, even a few efforts at violence. But the network of support they'd built held firm. You cannot save everyone by working yourself to death, Lanfen said gently. Trust others to help carry the burden. She was right, of course. The community had rallied around the safe house in ways that surprised everyone. Pastor Morrow had become the counselor providing spiritual support to the residents. Dr. Holloway ran the medical clinic with 2 assistants. Elijah had expanded his blacksmith shop to include job training. Even Josie Chen taught telegraphy skills to girls who wanted to learn. There's something else, Lanfen said. Letter came from the territorial governor. They want me to testify before a congressional committee in Washington about trafficking, about what needs to be done. That's a big responsibility. Yes. They want me to speak for all victims, all survivors. She looked uncertain. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I'm not strong enough? August touched her shoulder gently. You're the strongest person I know. You survived hell and built something beautiful from the ashes. That's what real strength looks like. I was not always strong. When you found me in that alley, I was ready to die. Had given up hope. But you didn't die. You fought. You saved yourself and others. He gestured toward the safe house. Look what you've built. A commotion from the street interrupted them. August stepped outside to see a crowd gathering around the new bell tower, a bronze structure that had been erected where the Painted Rose Saloon once stood. At its peak hung a large bell with smaller ones surrounding it in a circle. Pastor Morrow stood at the base of the tower holding a rope connected to the main bell. Beside him, a young Chinese woman August didn't recognize, held a small bell in her hands. "This is Xiao Mei," Morrow announced to the crowd. "She's our 30th resident. 30 young women who have found safety and hope in our community." The crowd applauded townspeople's safe house residents, even some of the business owners who had initially been skeptical. Grief Hollow had become something unprecedented on the frontier, a town that actively fought against human trafficking instead of profiting from it. Xiao Mei rang her small bell, its clear tone carrying across the desert air. Then Pastor Morrow rang the main bell once, as was tradition for those who didn't make it, for those still waiting to be found. But today, something different happened. As the main bell's tone faded, other bells began to ring, first from the church, and then from the school, then from businesses throughout town. The entire community was joining in the ceremony. August felt tears on his cheeks and didn't try to hide them. "Beautiful sound," Lanfen said, joining him in the street. "Yes, it is. Do you know what it means, all the bells ringing together?" August listened to the harmonious chorus echoing off the surrounding mesas. "Tell me." "It means we are not alone. None of us. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how lost we feel, there is always someone listening. Someone ready to answer when we call." The bells continued for several minutes, their voices rising and falling like a song of hope. When they finally stopped, the silence that followed felt different, not empty, but full of promise. "There's something I need to tell you," August said. "About Washington, about the future." "What is it?" "The federal government wants to create a national task force against human trafficking. They've offered me the position of territorial coordinator." He paused. "It would mean traveling, establishing more safe houses, training local law enforcement." Lanfen was quiet for a long moment. "You would leave here, not permanently. This would always be home base. But there are other towns like Grief Hollow was, other girls like you were. They need help too. And you need to help them." "I think so, yes. Sarah and Emma, if they could see what we've built here, what we've accomplished." He trailed off. "They would be proud," Lanfen said softly. "They would say their deaths were not meaningless if they led you to save others." That evening, August sat in his office, reviewing reports from other territories. 5 more trafficking rings had been broken up in the past 3 months, partly due to intelligence from the Grief Hollow operation. Dozens of young women had been rescued, their captors arrested and tried. But he knew the fight was far from over. There would always be men like Dae Sung, always be communities willing to profit from human misery. The difference was that now, there were also communities like Grief Hollow places that had chosen to be part of the solution. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lanfen entered carrying a small wrapped package. "For you," she said. "Going away present." August unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small bronze bell, similar to the ones carried by safe house residents, but engraved with different words. For August Ridley, who heard the call and answered. "I can't accept this. These bells are for survivors." "Oh, you are a survivor," Lanfen interrupted. "You survived loss, survived guilt, survived the temptation to give up. Now you help others survive too." August held the bell up to the lamplight, watching it gleam. "What am I supposed to do with it?" "Ring it when you need to remember that you are not alone. Ring it for the girls you save and the ones you cannot. Ring it to honor Sarah and Emma and to celebrate the life you have built in their memory." He tested the bell's tone, clear, pure, resonating with hope. "Thank you. Thank you for finding me in that alley. For choosing to care about one broken Chinese girl when it would have been easier to walk away. Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely, wild, free. Once August might have identified with that sound. Now he heard something different, the call of duty, challenging and dangerous, but full of purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Staying here instead of going home to China. This is home now. These people, this work, this is where I belong. She paused. Do you regret staying? August thought of all the paths he hadn't taken, all the places he could have gone to forget his pain. Then he thought of the 18 young women asleep in the safe house, of the trials that had sent traffickers to prison, of the bells that rang every morning to honor the lost and celebrate the found. No, he said finally, no regrets. As if summoned by his words, the bronze bell in his hand chimed softly just once, barely audible. But in that quiet tone, August heard everything that mattered. Justice served lives, saved hope, restored. The sound faded into the desert night, but its promise remained. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more lives to save, more battles to fight. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. The bells of Grief Hollow would ring again at dawn, as they did every day, calling the living to remember the dead, challenging the comfortable to help the suffering, promising the lost that someone was always listening. And August Ridley, former marshal, current sheriff, and eternal guardian of the forgotten, would be there to answer that call, forever and always.